We live? Okay. I'm going to call the December 21st, 2022 meeting of the Municipal Building Commission to order at 6:02 p.m. We have two things to do tonight. One is that we need to talk about the Hyman Fine gym floors, and the second thing is we're going to get a presentation on the public safety complex feasibility study. So, let's, for the record, since I don't think we have to have a roll call, let's just say that Terry DeSisto, Ed Stanton, Jackie Romanicki, Gail Clark, Jerry Freecott, Jay Allard, and myself are here. That constitutes a quorum. And Mark, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Municipal Building Commission. My name is Mark Zawatsky. I'm a principal at Port Construction Consulting. And tonight, both Arno Skalski and I will say that double ACS did not forward the invite to Arno, so his screen also indicates my name because I forwarded the invite to him. So I renamed myself on the screen as the real Mark Zawatsky, and Arno Skalski from Sokotech Architects is also on the call. So we're here to talk about, first item of order is to discuss and to review the letter, the draft letter from Sokotech to the contractor dated December 21, 2022, which I believe was distributed from Arno to Jeremy Stahl, and then perhaps distributed to the remainder of the Municipal Building Commission members. So Arno and Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to begin discussing that, and that will lead to further discussions about the quality control, quality assurance, and other related issues with the Hyman Fine gymnasium floor.
Okay, so let me just say that Andrew Acosta has come in so that the record will reflect that. And secondly, do you want to give an overview of what happened with the Hyman Fine floor?
Certainly. Arno, do you want to go first?
Yes, I think one thing that I want to say is that we had initially approved FJ Roberts' application for payment number 2 prior to doing further investigation on the issue at the Hyman Fine School. So our recommendation today is to withdraw that approval for application 2. And just to go into the issues at the Hyman Fine School, we had initially found that there were some undulating floor conditions or irregular floor conditions, which were only visible when the lights were turned out. Once they became visible, they were apparent in generally the area around underneath the basketball hoop and beyond. On one end of the floor, we weren't able, when we did our initial site visit on December 15th, the opposite end of the floor could not turn the lights out, so we weren't able to see that. But we did ask the contractor to join us for a site visit this past Monday, December 19th, where we were able to review the entire floor. And with their assistance, they had brought for a 10-foot straight edge to verify the conditions of the floor surface. Now, our specifications required that the floor surface be in tolerance for an eighth within a 10-foot radius, an eighth of an inch in a 10-foot radius. So we went around the floor and verified, or I should say, reviewed all those areas, and we came to the conclusion, and primarily the contractor came to the conclusion that the floor did need to be replaced. Since then, we've received some email correspondence that we received today, indicating that they would like to explore the opportunity to not replace the whole floor, but replace select areas. In their opinion, they think they can accomplish that and provide a quality floor, and within the specification tolerances. We do question whether they can accomplish that, but they're going to provide some additional information in terms of plotting out areas of where these conditions occur, and also identifying where they'll, cut in seams to blend in with floor lines. So we have not received that document yet, so I guess at this point, I think we're waiting on that document just to review it and just to see what the sheer quantity of repairs will ultimately need to be. So are there any questions that I can?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, Mark, that screen behind you, that's the floor, right?
Yes, sir. This is prior to the painting of the lines, this is the Hyman Fine gymnasium floor. Prior to the painting of any lines, this picture is effective, I believe, October 12 or 13.
Okay. Secondly, from what I understand, the contractor's saying they need about a 2-week period to do the remedial work. Is that correct?
Yes, that they've indicated that they need approximately 2 weeks to remove the existing flooring per their proposed scope of work area. Whether it's to remove the entirety of the floor or it's to remove the majority, half of it or 3/4 of it or whatever, is ultimately required, in which the Municipal Building Commission, I guess the first question is whether or not the City of Attleboro and the architects are accepting of a proposed solution that will yield the specified results of 1/8 inch within the 10-foot diameter, but not necessarily end up replacing the entirety of the floor and ultimately modifying the seam locations. Contractors said that they would place those seams on painted lines. And as you've observed from site visits, those seams are visible. And right now they're supposed to be offset per the manufacturer's printed instructions. And I believe that what they're proposing perhaps is to place them in an aligned fashion. So the reality here is that the substrate, the existing concrete material that's been in that building since it was originally constructed, and once the original floor was a poured-in-place material, the floor that was removed, and so the undulating condition of the existing substrate was not visible because the flooring itself was of varying thickness, probably from, a 1/2 inch down to perhaps 1/4 inch. And now we have a situation where the floor undulates and is out of flatness and out of tolerance by 1/4 inch plus at multiple locations across the entirety of the 7,500 square foot area. So the first question is, the contractor said that they're going to propose a plan that remedies that situation without replacing all of it. And, the question is that does Socotec accept that, and is it suitable under their means and methods? The second question is, so that's their quality control. And let me just backtrack for a moment. The floor, since this contract was for 2 gymnasium floors, Hyman Fine and Hill Roberts. The Hill Roberts floor was completely floated with an Ardex material, a self-leveling compound of a thickness suitable to create a floor flatness issue that has not been questioned. And the Hyman Fine School was not floated with a full Ardex material. Rather, what they did, and I have photographic documentation of it, that they ground some of the high spots and then infilled some of the low spots, and apparently did not do it suitably. So the question, one of the questions that this is before the Municipal Building Commission is, under the owner's responsibility for quality assurance, whereas the contractor owns quality control, does the owner want us to entertain or to find a third-party testing agency that can do floor flatness and level test per the applicable ASTM standard? Or are we going to just wait and reactively respond to the contractor's proposed plan? So that's one of the questions that we need to discuss and resolve, whether it be tonight or in an upcoming meeting.
Well, Mark, I guess I'm wondering, until we have a proposal from the contractor, how can we evaluate it?
Well, we can do our own due diligence to understand the totality of the problem, and then when they present to us their solution, we can evaluate it based on the results of a third-party analysis as to the flatness and levelness of this floor and its compliance or lack thereof to the contract documents.
Right, but you've already been out there and you've already seen that in a number of areas it doesn't comply, correct?
Yes, and the contractor in person indicated that of their upset, the general manager of the flooring company said, we're going to replace the entirety of the floor. They've now, in writing, backtracked from that and said, well, we'd like to only replace a portion thereof, and hopefully it will be good enough, or it will resolve the issue by not doing the entirety of it.
Why would we want to accept a hopefully it's good enough, number one? Number two, if the seams aren't the way the manufacturer is suggesting, don't we have a warranty problem? And number three, I'm just wondering, if this work isn't done immediately, is there any safety problem for the children or the staff?
Three really good questions. First off, I will say, and Arno is here to discuss it, I don't believe that the city of Attleboro has ever accepted the Hyman Fine floor. Despite the words and writing within the four corners of their letters, this floor has never been fully accepted. So the question is, they've said that they will do this work under warranty. We haven't paid for it, we haven't accepted it. I believe that's the city's position, that's Arno's position, and he can speak for himself. So we have a baseline disagreement as to the status of the work. And if you read Arno's letter dated December 21, he's very clear in that the project was initially determined to be substantially complete as of October 31st. Subsequently, we've learned that it does not meet spec, and that the purpose of this letter that Arno has generated is to formally put them on notice.
So Mark, should we take a vote to rescind the substantial completion?
I think Arno has already proffered or offered the suggestion to rescind the prior vote to approve application for payment number 2, which is for the period through October 30, actually that was through September 30th. And supplementally, yes, I do believe that, after discussion, the Municipal Building Commission needs to discuss whether or not the date previously recommended by the architect and your representatives of October 31st, prior to our awareness of this floor flatness and tolerance issue, needs to be reconsidered.
So then, I know Jerry has a question, but let me ask you again the safety question. Is there any opinion because they're not going to be doing this work next week. So is there an opinion as to whether we can continue to use the floor until February or April vacation, or even worse in the summer, to make sure that there's no problem for the children or the staff members?
I can't really answer that question other than to say that the staff at the Hyman Fine School has indicated that they have modified or since occupancy of the building, of the gymnasium area effective October 31, they have not been performing activities that require or that utilize more advanced movement. And so I believe that the end users, the educators and the students using it are on a modified use of the gymnasium without using, with their educational plan being modified.
So therefore,
I think that's a question for the Attleboro Public Schools to comment in on as to whether or not they want to continue to use this. I cannot do that.
well, no, but I was asking your professional opinion as to whether there was an injury hazard here. But let me go further and say, why wouldn't we tell them to propose a plan and to do it right away, even if we have to close the gym down for 2 weeks in January? Why wouldn't we say, whatever you're going to do and whatever you propose, whether we accept it or say you have to do more, why wouldn't we tell them to be out there on January 10th or whatever the appropriate date is and say, look, get this work done. We don't want to wait till February. We don't want to wait till April. That's not what we bargained for.
Right, we can clearly do that. I know that the contractor has stated that, their existing backlog and allocation of resources in this difficult, post-COVID, ongoing COVID situation with manpower has impacted their business operations, and they wanted to utilize resources of what they call the A-team or their premium team. And they indicated that it wouldn't be later until towards the end of January or during February that those resources would be freed up. We can certainly demand specific performance at the earliest opportunity, and if that's the direction of the Municipal Building Commission, we will certainly relay that to them. If the operation was going to take 2 full weeks, and 1 week could be done over a February vacation, and the other inconvenience would be just a 1 week delay. Again, that's a decision of the Attleboro Public Schools and the Municipal Building Commission. We will, relay your direction to us.
Well, but why would we want to wait till the end of February to get this done if the schools are only able to use the gym on a modified basis? Jeremy, do you have something to say?
Yeah, so in terms of the timing that's least disruptive educationally, like Mark had said, I would defer to the schools. I know we were able to modify and use other spaces when the weather was nicer. In January, that's not quite the case. So the schools had indicated that April would be better for them in terms of what they're able to provide as an alternative. So I will have some more discussions with the public schools and see if a 1 week disruption in February is better than a 2 week disruption as soon as possible, and what their preference is.
Okay.
With the school department and the way the contractor's been with their schedule to date, they don't seem to meet their proposed schedules. So if they're looking at 2 weeks, ideally, yeah, that would work. But the way the school's been going, is it going to 2 weeks turn into 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and then they're like, oh, now we're just going to wait until the summer? So
Well, and what I'm afraid of further, Andrew, is that they propose a fix and it turns out not to be good. And so they take the gym out of operation for 2 weeks and then they say, you know what, we should have replaced the whole floor. And now it's next summer. Jerry, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. Mark, is this a cosmetic issue or a serviceability issue?
It's a functional issue, Jerry. What we have is a situation where there are undulations or waviness within the flooring. It's really not visible while the lights are on, but if you turn half the gymnasium lights off, you can read and see this. It doesn't seem to affect the bouncing basketball, but it doesn't mean to say that it won't and isn't a potential safety hazard, despite the fact that this, new GER floor material by itself meets all of the ASTM standards for the safety related ASTM guidelines. But since it's out of tolerance and out of spec, it needs to be remedied, and so that the city of Attleboro receives the product that they purchased. The contractor is acknowledging it's out of spec, and they're proposing, a remedy. And so it goes back to my earlier question: if and when they submit their plan to do a portion of it, as the chairman just indicated, what would be the consequences of them, under their means and methods, performing a 50 or 60 or 40 or 80% remediation of it, only to find that it wasn't a satisfactory solution, and then they would have to then go back and do it for a third time. So I think the position, and Arno is more than happy to speak for himself as to whether or not, he is the architect of record, is willing to accept anything other than specific performance of the specified, of all the items contained within the project manual, and that is for offset seams.
All right, in that letter, it said that they were gonna repair portions of it under the warranty. Why are they using that terminology? Why do they wanna do this under the warranty? Is this helping them out financially somehow? Do they have insurance or what?
And I think he just miswrote that statement.
Okay.
Because if it's never been accepted, then
Well,
the
we
warranty
did
period
declare
wouldn't have
substantial
started.
completion, which is why I believe we need to take a vote to rescind that based on the knowledge that we have now. And obviously, we don't want to pay them anything further. Now, we do have a meeting coming up on January 4th, and so I think that at this point, we need more information from the schools, and we need more information from the contractor as to what his proposed fix is. But I do believe that we should at least take the vote to rescind the payment of requisition 2 and a vote to rescind the acceptance of substantial completion as of October 31st.
Yeah, I think those are the two motions for tonight. And then, Mark, if we can get a proposed schedule from the contractor to discuss at the January 4th meeting, and then I'll discuss with the schools between now and that meeting on their preference, scheduling-wise. And then we can take the discussion from there on the 4th. But I think those are the two votes we should take now.
Well, there would be one third vote, which is authorizing the sending of the draft letter that Socotec has forwarded with nine specific items plus a paragraph.
Yes, I agree. Jerry, do you have more?
I'd like to make a motion that we refuse a patchwork job.
That's my inclination.
I agree.
But
And we
I
paid
think we
a lot
have
of money.
to.
Why if the floor is gonna fail in the future, it's gonna be at the seams.
Right.
I'm sure people have seen it in their own homes or other people's homes where the floor covering comes apart in the seams. That's where the let's go.
Right. I just think that legally, we have to wait for them to make a formal proposal. But I agree with you that my inclination is to reject that proposal and tell them they should do it just the way they did at Hill Roberts, which is pull up the floor, float the stuff to level it, and then put it back right. That's my inclination.
I've got
I
another
agree.
question with the quality control versus the quality assurance. So is it my understanding that the quality control is on the contractor's responsibility?
Yes, under, the AIA documents, the owner owns quality assurance, the contractor is responsible for quality control. And obviously, their quality control was lacking on this particular substrate leveling issue. And
And the,
The question that I've presented is, does the owner, and I'm able to, solicit quotations, and we can present and discuss it at the next January meeting, as to whether or not they want, you want, for the city to do its own floor flatness and level test per the ASTM E1155 standard, which I understand is the standard in the industry for this type of work.
But Mark, I'm confused because we know already that it doesn't meet spec and the contractor has already agreed that it doesn't meet spec. So why would we spend money on somebody else to tell us it doesn't need spec?
I guess it's to protect the city's interest should this item become more contentious. Right now, the contractor has been amenable to doing repair and replacement work, doing work in order to comply with the specifications. If once they receive a letter or are told they're not being paid or whatever the ultimate decision of the Municipal Building Commission is, their position may change, and we need to be armed with all the facts to defend the city's position as to why, as Jerry said, he wants to refuse a patchwork job. I totally understand, the comments. I get it. I might say similar things if I were sitting in your chair and on the commission. Just looking to protect the city's interests, and I'm suggesting that this might be a potential course of action. And we don't need to decide it tonight. You could, we can solicit a proposal, and based on how the travel of it goes between now and the next Municipal Building Commission, you'll be then armed with additional material, information and documentation, and the ability to then make informed decisions.
Yeah, any third-party testing, we're not going to be able to get a contract and a purchase order before the January 4th meeting anyway. So if we send this letter out, tonight, tomorrow, whenever Arno sends it out, and then wait for that response from the contractor. And should we need a third party, we can take action at the January meeting or sometime thereafter.
And so, any other comments or questions from the commission members? No. Because I know we have something else we need to do tonight, but.
just a question, how did it go? Why was one school done with the self-leveling substrate and Hyman Fine?
Means and methods were up to the contractor, and
So
that's the way they did it.
Thought it was gonna be acceptable?
I suspect they thought they were gonna save some money, and it turns out that they shot themselves in the foot, Andrew.
Sounds like
So,
So
Wait.
just, can I
sure,
ask a question, just to be clear? I'll send this letter, right? You want me to revise it to rescind the substantial completion date of October 31?
assuming that we vote that in the next minute or two, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So, are we ready to
Oh, yes.
vote? So I think the first motion would be to rescind the vote of 2 weeks ago to pay requisition number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
What is that requisition for?
100 and
Payment
some.
for both schools or just one?
It's one contract.
Okay.
Yeah, so it includes equal amounts of items in both schools. I think it was about $175,000. We didn't pay it, we pulled it out of the warrant.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Second motion would be to rescind substantial completion that had previously been declared for October 31st, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And thirdly would be to authorize the architect to send his draft letter dated today, revised, however, to include the rescission of the substantial completion declaration.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Anything else that we need to do on this? Everybody satisfied that you know what we need to know?
Yep.
Okay, then thank you, Arno, thank you, Mark, and we'll see you either in person or virtually on January 4th.
Very good. Happy holidays, and my apologies to KBA on the delay of this conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, bye.
All right, now to the most important part of the meeting, KBA. Do you want to introduce yourselves again?
Sure thing, yeah. So I'm Sean Schmiegel, project architect and project manager as well on this project.
Eric Royce, landscape architect on this project. And Todd Costa, principal in charge of the project.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't see any representatives of the police or fire departments here.
Yeah, fire was not able to make it. He said he'd watch it later. Police, he had a commitment until 6, and he said he was going to be here after that.
Okay, well, it is 6:33-ish, so I think we should go ahead. So, what have you been doing for the last couple of months?
Couple months, yeah. So we'll give a high-level update on where we've been, and we'll move forward into some of the little minor details of what we've been investigating over the course of the last few months. So over the late fall, mid-fall, we visited all the engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, structural engineer. We visited both the police station and the fire station. Walked through the buildings, walked through the buildings, reviewed all the systems, reviewed some of the conditions of the existing building, interior and exterior. Generated reports. We have the reports all in draft form. We haven't been able to complete that report yet because we're still in the process of doing the rest of the documentation. So that concurrently as that was happening, of the existing conditions assessments with our engineers and ourselves, we reviewed, we sat with the chief, both chiefs, police and fire, and reviewed some of their program needs and assessments of what they currently have versus what their future needs are for a facility of this type. So police department, we've sat, Todd and myself sat with chief for two or three times already, and we went through many hours of the program analysis of each types of programs or elements within the building, as well as for future building. Fire is also happening at the same time. So within the next, probably by the end of the year, early next year, we'll have those programs combined to present, what a future facility and scale might be for a combined public safety facility. In addition to that, we had an initial sit down with yourself, the mayor, and kind of came up with a list of sites throughout the city. Some city owned, some not city owned. And we'll go through those and kind of analyze, some of the challenges of some of those sites, as well as some of the benefits of some of those sites. So as we start honing in on the square footage of a new facility, we'll start being able to tick off some of the old, or some of the sites that won't work. And then once we hone in on a couple, 2 or 3 sites, we'll be able to analyze traffic analysis and response time studies. Right now we have about 12 or 13 sites, so, can't do a response study on the entire city. So once that gets honed in on, we'll be able to approach that. So if there's any questions on that, I'll just dive into a brief presentation. It's really high level. I'm not going to get into too much of the nitty-gritty quite yet. That'll come in the report when it gets finalized. So just going to walk through the existing conditions assessment, some high-level items on each of the department, or at the department here. So really just looking at the existing conditions of the fire.
Can you just stop you for 1 second? Do the people on the right side see, or do you want to take another chair?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sean.
So really the initial walkthrough, our team spent about half the day at the fire department. We walked with the chief, deputy chief, looked at some of the existing walls. There's signs of deterioration, cracks, splitting walls, splitting, cracked floors, which, with the age of the building, settlement issues. So it's typical of age of these types of buildings. So the vertical cracking on the interior CMU walls, again, with this age of the building, settlement issues, nothing life safety sufficient, or for instance, but over time, it's something that'll be, overall maintenance that needs to be maintained. There's some existing floor joists that are deteriorating. So again, with the age of the building, some moisture content that's coming around the perimeter of the building. It's deteriorating some of the structure. Efflorescence and cracking on concrete foundation walls. That means, again, there's moisture coming into the foundation wall. So over time, it's going to continue to deteriorate. As I noted, cracking of concrete floors, loose lintels. So all the openings, there's lintels on top of the windows, and all of the openings, they're starting to rust, or most of them are rusting and beyond.
You're talking about the fire building right now?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
And I will say, when KBA was out there doing this existing conditions, they saw some conditions on the roof we had replaced this time last year, that there were some issues that we then had our contractor come out and address under warranty. So absent this existing conditions study, we wouldn't have found these deficiencies in the work performed last year.
So would it be safe to say that the current building needs to be replaced?
Correct. It's beyond its life expectancy. You know, it's you know, from a size standpoint, it's undersized. Once we get into the program of you know, what's needed to be on the facility, you know, it's undersized and it's beyond its life expectancy.
And it's more than 100 years old.
Exactly. So, you know, buildings nowadays are, you know, 50 to 70 years, you know, newly constructed. You know, this was built over 100 years ago, so it's beyond its life. So just a few now getting into some of the mechanical systems. It's currently not fully sprinklered. For
Ironic.
at a fire station, exactly. You know, at the age of that building, it wasn't done. You know, but there are areas that it is sprinklered, but it's not fully sprinklered. It's not mechanically ventilated, naturally ventilated, so there's not any fresh air coming into the building, which, you know, nowadays that's a necessity. You know, the current in the apparatus bay, the exhaust system is manually controlled. Nowadays, it's more pneumatic and automatically controlled. So, you know, all of the exhaust system, you know, there's additional CO2 happening within those apparatus bays, so it's all manually operated. So there's no, you know, if there's too much carbon dioxide in that space, they're manually opening up doors, or, you know, it's not automatic. Most of the clearances around the electrical board, electrical rooms and the mechanical rooms, it's being obstructed by general storage. So it's not because they have a choice, they just don't have any storage in these buildings. So they're utilizing, you know, duplicating some of the spaces as storage rooms because they don't have any extra space. Emergency lighting is missing largely throughout the building. Not all the buildings backed up by the emergency generator. Interior lights there's no automatic shut off for the interior lighting, so it's an energy code item, so it's just manually switches throughout the building. Nowadays, you know, per energy code, it's all automatic, you know, motion censored. There's exit signage that's missing, and, you know, fire alarm coverage is there, but it's not throughout the building.
That might be able to help a little bit. So one thing to consider with this is, when this building was built, what was the mission of the fire department? And the fire department's mission at that point in time was primarily structure fires. Their operations, their missions, their things that they're responsible for has largely changed, and that's what caused a lot of the storage issues. They went from dealing with a very set of guidelines to now they're at every traffic accident, they're at every rescue. So they went from a scope of work that was here to a much broader scope of work. The building does not support that mission as it was designed, that mission now as it was designed then. So that high level, very simple way of why a lot of that stuff is.
Yeah, I mean, fire prevention is a big thing this day, right? And
Yes.
nobody really thought much about preventing fires in the 1890s.
Austin Buggy.
Correct. So just a few images. You know, we have multiple images, but these are some high-level items. So as I noted before, the basement walls, you know, it's made of stone, you know, so it's starting to deteriorate. The cracking in the middle there, the vertical cracking, that's showing the settlement of some of the, I believe that's in the apparatus bay. Some of the floor joists, it's not the greatest of image, but you can somewhat see how the moisture is coming out from the outside wall, so that's starting to deteriorate again with the age of the building. It's common. You know, Looking further here, so some of the way that these floor joists on the left were fastened into the carrying beam, you know, they're starting to split, because that's not how you would typically do it, but that's how they have been done years ago. Efflorescence in the foundation wall, you know, that's all that white element there, so that's the moisture coming through the building, through the ground. Here's the rusting lintels, so all of the openings, the lintels are starting to rust, as you can kind of see the deterioration of the brick. The windows themselves are old metal windows, you know, not thermally broken. R values near to none. So a lot of energy consumption just to maintain some sort of comfort within these spaces. Some more seam cracking around the corner of the building to the right. Again, settlement issues, you know, just continuous. So if it's not maintained properly over the many years to come, it's just going to continue to deteriorate. Looking at the police department,
So before you go there,
Sure.
one of the questions has been timing. And so my takeaway from what I just saw was that if we don't do this in what I'm going to call a relatively short time frame, we may be spending money on this building to keep it functional. Is that a fair assessment? And we just spent $500,000 on a roof, and part of the problem we have in our city is that we put Band-Aids on gaping wounds instead of, in my mind, doing some good long-range planning. So it strikes me that asking the taxpayers through the mayor and city council to spend significant amounts of money on the windows, on the rusting areas, on the joists, on the water infiltration is something that you could say is throwing good money after bad. Would that be a fair assessment?
That is fair. Yes. Just going back to the roof here. So this is kind of a drone footage. So our structural engineer came out as well, and they flew the drone around the building, helps analyze, you know, some of the deficiencies. But I don't remember exactly where it was, but as Jeremy was noting earlier, there were some seaming issues on the new roof that were starting to deteriorate and starting to split. They came back out under warranty and repaired that under warranty. So going to the police station, there are a lot of similarities.
Sorry, Sean, were we also just asked municipal council for money to repair this roof because they're putting buckets underneath places?
Yeah, this roof is in rough shape as well. You can see how it's balanced. The lower roof where it looks like stones, that's the ballasted roof, and there's a lot of leaking happening there. And then the rubber membrane roof, the black roof up on the upper portion. This
is the police station?
This is the police station, yeah.
Formerly known as the Elks Hall.
Exactly. Yep. So the Elks,
which I believe is only 100 years old, not 120, right?
I believe you're correct. I remember the exact dates.
I thought it was something like 1923 as opposed to the 1890s.
Yeah, it's in the 1900s. It's not in the 1800s.
Yeah. So this roof, Jeremy, is also the subject of a maintenance request?
Yeah, we asked municipal council for $30,000 or something to replace this roof.
So as we walked the building, there's a lot of ceiling tiles that have been damaged because of the continuous leaking roof. When we walked with the chief, as you noted, they're placing buckets around. They know where they're happening, so they know where to put the buckets, but you know, it's just continued maintenance that needs to be maintained. And then similar, I think I'll get into it too, but they have the communication. There's an antenna up there, and a lot of the way it's fastened to the building, it's starting to corrode, and it's becoming somewhat of a hazard. You know, the mechanical unit that's sitting there, you can see the rusted spots on the top. It's past its life expectancy. So again, it's similarly throwing good money after bad if to continue to maintain a building that's past its life expectancy. So similarly to the fire station, water stain tiles, which I just noted, the roof is past its life expectancy, which you already know. And the interior walls are starting to crack because of settlement issues, efflorescence, again, moisture issues. The flooring is starting to crack in the concrete floors. The detention blocks on the lower level, in the lower basement level. So, that's all starting to crack. Lintels are rusted, the brick walls are cracking, the front entry masonry, which I'll have pictures of, but that's at the old Elks entrance. They covered the old entrance with a new entrance, and that's all starting to collapse, and it's actually, it's a safety issue that's starting. It needs to be addressed pretty quickly. And the downspouts aren't really connected to any drainage, so it's just the water's just collecting and going back into the building, and that's where the moisture issues are coming from. There's no central heating system. Everything is electric in the ceilings throughout the building, so that system is fairly inefficient and quite costly to heat the building. The electrical radiant ceiling panels, right, and the baseboard heaters. So that's even in the fall when we were there, it was cool or chilly, just to maintain what they have. The holding cells actually aren't currently heated or ventilated or exhausted, so that does not meet today's standards for a cell block or detention block. As I noted before, the cooling, the HVAC unit of that roof that was rusted. It was installed in 2006, so it's just at the end of its life expectancy, and they're currently having issues, or there's maintenance elements to that. The working clearances, again, storage issues. They're utilizing whatever space they can in the building to store to their current operation needs. Emergency lighting isn't there. Well, it's there, but not as sufficient as it needs to be to today's standard. Again, there's no motion sensors on the light switching, so it's just lighting on. Lights are on 24/7, and the fire alarm coverage is minimal. But it's there, but it's not to today's code.
Again, to help with one thing here. So item B there is one thing that to note, the cell block area, there are mandatory requirements for every community. It's not unique to Attleboro. If you're not meeting them, you're cited by the state on a yearly basis. They're basically saying your cells are non-conforming, okay to use based on X, Y, and Z scenarios, but they're non-conforming, just basically absolving the state if anything were to happen in there. So there is a risk potential even beyond just the heated and vented in that area.
So similar to the fire station, we have a lack of functionality, both physically and programmatically, for both facilities. Is that correct?
Yes. There was, when we were doing programming with the chief, kind of the next step to get ready for helping with the site selection, there was a unit or a division of the department, the social worker, basically, whose desk was in the hallway, right in common traffic. Now, this is somebody who's having pretty private conversations, but officers and other public folks are walking right past their office, because that was them being able to make do and find the areas that would work for them. So these are things that are, we want to improve for the operations of the department and obviously for the community at large.
Yeah. And I also understand from conversations with the police chief that there are some gender issues as well.
Yes.
Right, so the locker rooms, the division of male and female lockers right now, he had to put some of the female lockers, they're actually in the kind of the toilet room areas. I wish he was here, but the quantity is actually growing now. I think there's a few more that are being sworn in. So he needs to modify almost like a hallway within that portion of the locker room. And then he's gonna actually having to make the locker smaller, just to make them all fit, because of the space constraints. But yes, that's part of that as well.
So another reason among many that we need to undertake this project as soon as we can, correct?
To that aspect, the gender issue, there is a national trend right now. It's called the 30-30 Initiative on the International Association of Chief of Police Organization, that by the year 2030, not 30, 30% of the workforce in law enforcement will be, a female portion. Just from the data that we've received from the department, within the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen that jump from, I think it was, I'm just trying to recall from the top of my head, from 4 to 11. And it's growing. And the conversations with the chief, that is a growing side. There is more women joining that workforce, and it's a challenge that is being posed to the current department operations.
So just a few images, again, some of the roof, to the left, that's the
Antenna.
antenna, I'm calling it tie-offs, stanchions off of that to support the antenna. You know, they're starting to pull off the edge of the parapet, so that's becoming a maintenance issue, and the roofing around it is becoming deteriorated. Image to the right, the circled area, you know, the structure itself is just starting to pond, or to kind of cave in necessarily, so, you know, no insulation, but the structures itself it's creating a ponding issue, which in turn will, you know, further deteriorate the roof structure because of the heavy loads when their roof is ponding, the snow is ponding. The rusted frames, you know, to the left there, that's the old Sally port. One of the old Sally ports, which now is their archive storage. No humidity control. You know, water comes in. You know, they keep everything lifted off the floor because that's all they have for storage space. You know, that's one of the main entrance railings off the front entrance. You know, it's just beyond. It's starting to corrode. Sealants are starting to fail, so just further moisture coming inside the building or through the cavity wall. This is the front entrance, as I was noting, that the brick is starting to deteriorate, so you can see all the white, you can see the moss growing, kind of that curved portion in the front. That's what the chief is telling us, that was the old entrance and the old stairs underneath that. They built this entrance over it, but that arched portion is starting to actually fall in on itself. So in a short period of time.
If I remember right, the handicap access is around the back.
Correct. Yeah, they would have to call, or someone would have to go to the front lobby officer and say, I have a handicap patron, they'd have to go up to the back, so it's not accessible by any means to today's standards. Further brick cracking, again, settlement issues. So, as I noted in the beginning, we're starting, the police department programming is 99% complete. We have all the square footages identified, walking through with the chief on his current needs to operate to today's standards. The locker room sizes, the male and female configuration, to the social worker office, to
All the divisions have been accounted for, properly planned, not only for today, but going forward into the future. And what we can see and predict at this point, and trying to predict as far out as possible, about how the police profession is evolving, and trying to predict some of that and give that space, so to speak.
It's not running down the street after criminals anymore.
No, it's surprisingly very progressive. The POPU, and I just looked at it earlier,
Problem-oriented policing.
yes, thank you. You know, kind of analyzing where incidences are, and they're meeting on a regular basis to share that information amongst all the command staff, you know, and all the folks that are out on the street. It's not a common operation in a lot of departments. You know, some of the smaller communities that we work with, it's not there. Even some of the cities, that's not really as affluent in those departments. So he's got a lot of good ideas and moving forward with helping to the community, but they just don't have the space. I mean, they had that POPU unit was over in the DPW, excuse me, not the DPW, the DMV building.
Yeah, I mean, I also remember that at the time they moved from Wall Street to here, where they thought they were in a great place, but the use of computers, screens, the monitoring that goes on of places in the city, none of that stuff existed in the early 80s when they moved into this building. So the times I've been in there, there's stuff everywhere.
Yes. And their department is split apart, as Todd just noted. You know, they have the basement of the DMV area, so they're walking back and forth, you know, depending on what they need to, you know, every given day. So, you know, very inefficient of time throughout the day.
And I think one of the other things, if we're jumping ahead,
Sure.
you know, tell me if you have this later, but one of the things that I know both chiefs were interested in, and I think the city as policy, was having common dispatch and creating some efficiencies. I think we have challenges in both departments that we can make this better, correct?
Yep, no, exactly. And those are the conversations we've had. So as we get, you know, like I said, 99% done with the police department, the fire department's following quickly behind that. So early in the new year, we'll have kind of a consolidated program for both departments and understand what the full facility size would be and should be. We'll be able to provide you that information, and then that will help inform the site locations, which we can go through in a few moments as well.
Yeah, so let me just raise something that I think might be correct, which is that some of this material is probably sensitive, more so for the police maybe than the fire. But I think at some point we may have to be careful as to what material is made public and which material is not.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Because certainly the chief can advocate for what each chief can advocate for what they need, but I would imagine that you know, the specific ways that they do things, some of that might not be things we want to share, correct?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so we'll typically, before we come to a setting like this, we would have a pre-meeting with the chiefs to say, this is what we're anticipating the showing, and they'll say yes or no, or depending on the situation. But you're right, you know, it's sensitive information. So then I'll hand over to Eric to walk you through the site discussions and site analysis.
Okay.
Right, Eric?
The laser pointer?
It's
I
not
don't
gonna
think the
work.
laser will show up on that, so you may have to.
Stand up.
Stand up.
Before I get going with the site, one of the things with the sites is the footprint of the building. So going forward, we're looking at what size the building needs to be and comparing it to the sites. Some of these sites are going to drop off the list really quick because they just can't fit the building. But can you just kind of generally set up what's going into this building and why it is the size that it is and what the size we're targeting?
Sure, yeah, so, you know, based on local communities or, you know, municipalities of size of the sworn officers, size of the departments, you know, we're I think, if I'm remembering here, but roughly between 55 and 60,000 square feet on the police department side. It's gonna be pretty similar to that on the fire department side, maybe a little bit less, so we're looking in the 100,000 square foot range of a building. And that includes the apparatus bays on the fire department side, the bunks, the administration, the decontamination areas, you know, which is, they have some, but not to today's standards. So that kind of, you know, splits on the fire department side. Similarly, on the police department side, just their operations of the administration, the sally ports, the detention block, going back to the regional, not the regional, the dispatch, you know, combined dispatch area, and how that is positioned within the building. Other departments, the detectives and then the evidence storage, archive storage for both departments. Anything?
Yeah, I'll help you with this. So what we look at is each individual department, police, fire, all of their individual units within that, so on and so forth. We come up with 2 individual programs. So as a homework assignment, if you would, we take that back to our kind of desktop survey of it, and we look for areas that are very similar between the 2 departments, to come up with a list of ideas, to come bring back to the departments to say, hey, you know, these things are very similar in operation. For example, each department would be typically requesting a training room, or maybe a community engagement room, and then, you know, quite possibly an EOC. Well, if you're both requesting the same thing, can we combine that put that to a public area, maybe make it a little bit bigger, maybe, make it so it's adaptable in size, throw different ideas down so we can look for ways, so maybe, individually, you'd be looking at about 120,000, just using, off the top of my head numbers, for examples. But maybe it's 120,000 square foot individual buildings combined. But when we bring them together, we might be able to get that below 100 once we find those, synergies. And that includes the mechanical systems, things like elevators, stuff of that nature. So that homework assignment is one aspect, if you would. Bring that back to the departments. Well, we need something a little bit more geared towards us, so on and so forth, and that refines the overall program. Second part in all of that is commonly referred to by each of the departments, their assets, right? Their number of vehicles. Police department has X number of vehicles. Fire department, most of their larger vehicles live inside, but then you also have to account for the change of their shift. Their firefighters coming in, and they both have to be in the building at the same time. You can't have one leave and the other one comes in. So you have that overlap for the site requirements. The same thing, just a little bit more
Talking
frequently
about private
sometimes.
vehicle parking.
Excuse me?
Private vehicle parking.
Personal vehicle parking,
Yeah.
yes. Same thing exists on the police department side, just a little bit more frequently. And then the police department side, some of them are specialty vehicles if they have that. Throw that into the fishbowl, so to speak, as we work out what we're looking for a site. And then if you're having a community engagement side of things, community visits, both departments, different reasons. But if you put a community room in or something like that, then you have a community parking aspect. So all of that is kind of the prescriptive note that Eric uses and the team uses to search and kind of refine out which sites are going to work for us.
So a couple of questions, if I could then. One is, if we need around 100,000 square feet, is that horizontal? Is that vertical? What are we looking at here? Are we going to build a 4-story building? Are we going to build a 2-story, a 1-story?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things I know is that when we did the DPW building and the water building, one of the functions that was important was getting all of the vehicles undercover.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the police cruisers are out on the street, I guess most of the time, but have we given thought to, taking care of our assets by having vehicles undercover?
Absolutely.
We haven't gotten that far down the road.
Okay, but what about, do we need 2 acres of a footprint, or do we need 1 acre and we're going up? Have you thought about that part?
So it's both, basically. So it's roughly 100,000, vertical, so depending on the footprint, obviously the apparatus is on the lower level, the sally ports, can be on multiple levels. It depends on the site, the grade elevations. But, programmatically, as a whole building, we're looking in that range of 100,000 plus or minus. So depending on the site, it could be a 3-story building, it could be a 2-story building, it could be a 4-story building. It all depends on, as you get higher and higher and higher, it gets a little bit more challenging just from an operational standpoint. But the site kind of drives that. Looking at vehicle storage and personal parking, again, the site will drive whether you need to have a parking structure or it can just be all surface parking. If it's a condensed site, you need to consolidate parking, so you stack it into a parking structure. If you have more site to work with, you can have more surface parking. Both of those can be covered with either, this is a whole other direction, but, some municipalities will work with, a solar canopy in the parking.
I would like PV panels as part of this.
Right, so then you have a solar canopy that covers the parking lots, whether it's in the parking structure or in a surface parking. So there's a lot of opportunities to protect the assets.
Okay.
And
And of course, I guess the other thing we really have to pay attention to is, as I understand it, is that response times aren't an issue for the police because their vehicles are on the road, but response times are a major issue for fire headquarters.
Correct.
So that you couldn't just say, well, let's put it in where the old Finberg School is, almost in Seekonk, because that would not meet the response times for the center of town. So obviously, the site disbursement must be limited by that, right?
It will be, yes.
That'll weigh heavily into how that division of space, so to speak, may work, because it becomes an analysis not only of response time, but manpower allocation. Because you have a certain number of fire stations within the town already. It's just maybe if the building goes here and there is apparatus located at that, you may need to shift where some of that manpower is located to properly cover the entire community.
So looking at our satellite fire stations is part of your analysis here?
I believe that is, because that is all encompassing of your response time. Because it's not just from one, pinpoint location adjustment. Want to make sure from a town-wide standpoint that we're not getting the stations, the response isn't too far overlapped, so to speak. So from a substation or a satellite station, we're not getting the headquarters so that, there's a focus in one area and then another area.
Right, because we have 3 satellite stations, South Attleboro, Twin Village, and Briggs Corner, right?
Correct.
So you're saying we need a comprehensive plan?
Correct. Very simple way of my long-winded explanation.
Yeah, and I've spoken with your consultant, Bob, and Chief LaChance about this too, and, we have a current coverage map right now based upon our 4 stations, and if you take away headquarters, you don't necessarily need to put headquarters exactly back where it is. Those maps can be shifted a little bit, and we maintain the same response times, it's just the coverage area for one particular station may shift one way or the other. So we're definitely not agnostic to it, but it's also not static.
Okay. Go ahead.
Some other considerations, since we were talking some site considerations, it's early on in the process for us to be looking at these, but some other site considerations are the apparatus bay for the fire is a big space. It's a 2-story space, and you've got aprons potentially on both sides of that if it's a drive-through, and those aprons have to be large enough to get a piece of equipment out, all the way out, before you start making a turn, because your rear axle has to be out of the building before you can start turning. So it takes up a lot of space on a site. Some other things to consider that we always consider for public safety on site is we have to have an impound, some sort of fenced-in area where you can put vehicles, unless you're putting it somewhere else in town. Typically, the police want it on the site, so if they have a question about evidence or something like that, they could go down and look at it. In addition to the uncovered or site impound that's secure, we also look at putting somehow working in some covered or interior impound spaces, because if you've got a real sensitive vehicle that needs to be put somewhere, they might have to keep that for a year or more while the trial's occurring, and that's evidence in that trial. So we consider that. And we also consider, and we'll work with the department on this, is that typically patrol parking is in an enclosed, secure area. So usually it's a gate, electronic entrances in and out. You have to have 2 redundant entrance, so it's always got to have 2 egresses in and out for an emergency. If somebody tried to block one, they still could get out the other way. So these are all things we think about. It's really early on for us. I'm not even there yet. We're more trying to nail down the sites and which site will work. We were given 9 sites to look at. These are the 9 sites. They're pretty central in town. Some of the ones over in the lower left are a little remote compared to the ones that are in the center. But we'll talk about those. We were originally given a list of sites based on like the Dunkin' Donuts site, the Zebra site. And we had to work with you guys to nail it down and get an actual address and parcel. And that's where we're kind of at right now, because though it's 9 sites, some of those sites are 3 or 4 properties or more than that. So I'll get into that. So this is the first site, one of the first sites. These are in no particular order of preference. But what we've got on it, each one of these sites, they're different scales. So in the upper left, you can see what a 100,000 square foot building footprint would look like. Because each of these sites are a different size and these drawings are different scales, I included that block, and you'll see how they change sizes. But you can see relative that 100,000 square feet will fit on this is the old National Guard site. It's actually 2 properties. But that building will fit there, but then we also have to fit all the parking, the building aprons, circulation around the building and everything else. It's a good site, it's a flat site, it's potentially good. I would keep this on the list. But it is
Let
pretty
me
tight.
just add that for our Council on Aging project, this site was considered. And we were told by a member of the city council that the federal government was not likely to make this available to us for at least 4 years, that they have to go through a process of offering it to everybody on the federal level, then everybody on the state level before it gets to us. So while I understand keeping it on the list, if that information is correct, not even knowing for 4 years if you could get the site, in my mind, would be a detriment.
Yeah, that would be a detriment.
Especially given the current condition analysis you just showed us of both of those buildings.
The other site is the old Richardson School, 95 Pine Street. Again, these are different scales. You can see what an 80,000 square foot building will look like on this site. This site comes off the list really quick. I'm not going to dwell on it. The Highland Park site, we had initially looked at this, but the feedback that we got was that this is not feasible because of some Article 97 issues. I'm not sure what those are.
Well, let me say that there is an issue that relates to the state constitution that says that if something is a park, that if you want to use it for something other than as a park, you need a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature in order to allow that. Getting a vote of 2/3 of each house of the legislature is not easy. But whether that site could be used is, I think it's still a possibility, but obviously this is a 93-acre site, so it would be big enough to put whatever we needed. Is that correct?
Right. As you can
Look
see
at
in the
little
upper
square they
left,
have in the right-hand corner there.
that's your 100,000 square
comparison.
foot footprint up in the upper right.
That white box
That
up
white
there?
box.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if Article 97 resolved itself, and there is some discussions that have been started on that through the mayor's office, if it resolved itself, would this work from a response time kind of thing?
We believe so.
That would be the
Again,
next
it's preliminary, and the next step would be to start looking at that and start looking at all the specifics of this site if it stays on the list. But right now, we believe so. This is pretty much in a good location. Other than the traffic that you would see at the high school in the morning and the afternoon, this would be a good spot.
Yeah, and I think whether this stays on the list is feasible or not is a question for the next mayoral administration on what the particular futures of this park are and whether, and then it becomes a question to how much of the land we're taking from being parkland into,
Municipal use.
yeah, so it wouldn't, thank you, it wouldn't impact our tax exempt status of our borrowing because it's still municipal use and the vote was broad enough to begin with, but we do have the 97 and.
And just so you know, our current mayor has submitted his resignation effective January 3rd at 11:59 p.m.
Correct.
We have a city election for an interim mayor scheduled to occur on February 28th. From what I read in the Sun Chronicle, as dangerous as it may be to rely on that, it looks like the certification date would be March 10th. So around the 10th of March, we should have a mayor with more than interim well, with
Full mayoral
full
powers.
powers as opposed to less than full powers that we'll have between now and then. We will then have another election in November, but we should have a good solid 6 months of somebody who has the authority to send things to the council to make decisions. So we don't want to stop what we're doing, but we do understand that any issues relating to Highland Park and Article 97, we probably won't be able to resolve in the next couple of months.
Okay. Sounds like we keep it on the list, though.
I think we should.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly owned by the city and it's certainly large enough.
Definitely. Next site is the old high school site on County Street. Again, you can see
That's
that.
the old high school.
The old.
The old high school,
Because
yes.
the old high school over here, we just finished knocking down.
Yes. So the old high school, again, you can see that 100,000 square foot footprint of the proposed building. This site is much too small unless we take additional property.
It's got slope issues as well. The building sits up. It's smack dab with some neighborhoods surrounding it.
Right.
It has a lot of defects, right?
So this one comes off the list. This is the Seaver Market, the Dunkin' Donuts site. It actually is multiple properties. You can see what is the Seaver Market building, which is that big rectangle shape. Dunkin' Donuts is the property to the right of that, the smaller property. There's a number of, though it looks like a single lot, there are a number of smaller lots that are included in the old Seaver Market site.
Well, this is an active
Yeah.
shopping
It's an
center.
active shopping center, active
And it's
businesses.
owned by a family that comes out of New York. They happen to be clients of mine.
Yeah,
And I doubt that this is for sale.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking this comes off the list.
I think,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. This is the Commerce Street, the New England Sports Village site. New England Sports Village is the site in the yellow in the center. There are other sites which are in the brown that are around. One of them is a seafood place.
Well, the
Lot
Mar
12.
Seafood, which is, if you see that sort of roadway that goes up there,
Yeah.
and the lot to the right, client of mine has just gotten all the permits to build a light manufacturing facility there. However, the lot to the east of that, the brown area where the white thing is in.
Right.
That, my understanding is, might be for sale. Now,
Okay.
I do know that it has some challenges with geography or slope or topography or whatever the right word is. But that, the last I heard was that the owners of the sports village may be interested in selling that.
Okay.
Don't know how much they would want, don't know whether it would work for us in terms of the site work that would have to be done, but I think it is certainly large enough if it was available to us at a reasonable price, correct?
It would be, but the other consideration is this is one of the southernmost sites, and more remote sites compared to some of the other ones that are in the center of the city. So that's another consideration if location-wise, this is really feasible from the police and fire
Okay.
perspective.
The other complicating factor is that the owners of the Sports Village property are in bankruptcy, and not sure when they're coming up. And so being in bankruptcy limits your ability to sell property.
So, on the list, I think we keep it on the list for now.
I think we could keep it on the list,
Yeah.
but it's probably near the bottom, is what I'm hearing you say.
I would agree. Next site, and this was early on, the Riverwalk site. This is by the MTBA station. A number of sites that come down along the river. Evidently, this site that we were looking at was more toward Olive Street kind of fronting on that.
Okay, so is
down
this
to
the
bottom.
land that the Attleboro Redevelopment Authority owns?
Yep.
Okay, we do have a member of the authority board here.
I don't think it's for sale.
Again, if you look at the building, 100,000 square feet, this would be pretty, because this is such a narrow area, I don't think we could fit the program that we need to fit on this site. I think it comes off the list.
Yeah, I think so too.
This is the industrial park site. I got a question mark here because there's a number of sites. We were just given the word industrial park site. Pretty much all the properties here with the buildings on them, with the bigger buildings on them, is the industrial park. I'm not sure if it's the whole industrial park that's considered.
Is that 76 Frank Mossberg Drive?
This Mossberg.
The 10B that's up there in yellow, that's the 176. I wasn't sure if any other sites were being considered here
Well,
also.
my question is that 76 Frank Mossberg Drive? Because it looks like, is that Extension Street on the left?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Also owned by a client of mine. They recently got permits to put up a 70,000 square foot marijuana growing facility on that site. So I think this is probably off the list.
Yep. You can see also that the building footprint is not going to fit on that site.
Yeah, there is another vacant site in the area, but it has extreme hazardous waste problems on the other side of the street. So I suspect that that's probably off the table too.
And another reason that this should be possibly off the list is, again, it's one of the southernmost sites. It's not in the center of the city. Not an ideal location for police and fire.
Yeah, it's most of the way to Pawtucket.
So those are the sites we looked at. I'm not sure if you have any other sites you want us to look at. Those are the sites that we've.
I mean, from this
Put on
conversation
the list.
and conversations we've had before, you know, so stuff that's still on the list. National Guard site has timing issues. Highland Park has Article 97 issues. New England Sports Village has ownership, topography, and geography issues. And those are really the only three from this conversation that are feasible.
Size-wise.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I think we need to broaden our,
Oh, I think we do, but one of the things I'm
Field.
wondering about, which the city has always been hesitant to do, is would the city consider, for instance, an eminent domain taking somewhere in the area of the current central fire station and acquiring some properties to, in an assemblage to put something there? And, again, I don't know. That's a major policy decision for a mayor and a future council. So, but it just strikes me that we have very limited places right now, and unless we acquire property, or Article 97 goes away, we may be hamstrung here.
yeah, so I would ask if, regardless of ownership, if you can take some places that would make sense from a initial response time, total square footage, and this is something we can work on outside of this meeting between you and I. But looking at some privately held properties and
Right.
see if that would work.
So for example, the Richardson School, if that was only a portion of a site, would that be worth revisiting?
If it was a portion, we were taking the other buildings also around it? Yes.
Yeah, what's the building immediately to the north of it there?
That's the Bartek Rec Center.
Right, so whether that could be added to an assemblage, and whether the rec department would be moving, obviously, beyond the scope of our ability here at the Municipal Building Commission.
Yeah.
But, it just strikes me that there is city-owned property there. Would we be willing to, as a city, to evict the tenants from both of those sites? And would we then have to acquire some other additional space? I think we ought to know the answer to that question because we would certainly have to have a major league discussion with the mayor and city council about something like that. But it is also in pretty much the right place, isn't it?
It is in pretty much the right place. It's right downtown, right where you want it. But it's more of, you can see that's an 80,000 square foot footprint there on the upper left, that we would need more than just that one property. to
Or
make-
just those two properties?
Yeah, just those two
How
properties.
close are we then to the current station?
Like 2 blocks.
Yeah,
that far,
so
yeah.
one of the things I was kind of wondering about then was if we look at the current station, are there properties, around it that we might be looking at acquiring?
That's something we can visit.
How about on the existing site, if he was to do something like he did with the high school, like take the parking area and build a building there, then once they can move into that, take the building down and make parking in front of that.
Conceptually, that works, just it's not nearly big enough.
Yeah.
We'd have to acquire other properties,
Yeah.
I think is what you're
Right.
saying. But the
Right.
idea that Jerry came up with there is, I mean, isn't that an interesting idea? If we could assemble enough property to build new?
It's not impossible. It has been done, but there is a unique challenge with a emergency operation facility in that scenario that does not exist for the school. They're 24/7 and they have to get help, whereas a school is not 24/7 and it's, 9 months.
Right, but if we built a brand-new 100,000 square foot facility and then we knock this
Knock it
down
down.
to make parking, would that be something we could consider?
Yeah, that's what I tried to preference it. It's not impossible. We have done it. We've constructed 3/4 of a facility 6 foot off of an operating fire station to increase that. Move the department over, operate it out of the new facility while the last quarter was constructed. So it
I think
is,
the bottom line, though, here is that we need to get a little more creative,
Yeah.
and then we need to have a serious discussion with the powers that be as to what we're going to do. Obviously, land acquisition cost increases the price. Do you have a ballpark figure of what we're talking about here? Based on maybe number of dollars per square foot or something?
wouldn't want to even venture to that at this point in time. Because even we've been tossing around the 100,000 square foot number. Our fire programming specialist hasn't completed his homework assignment with the department yet. So we definitely want to do that refinement before we start to talk the overall figures.
But we're talking tens of millions, which probably means a debt exclusion.
Which definitely means a debt exclusion.
You just do one big one for everything.
And so if we were going to do a debt exclusion, we probably could put a council on aging on it
Yep.
too.
That's, yeah. that's
Just,
fair.
just do one, blow it up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a discussion for a different time, but the Council on Aging, my intent was to try to keep that inside of Prop 2.5 to limit the taxpayer impact.
Okay.
Right.
What
So-
about TI property? Is there anything in TI? That's a central location.
I don't know that there's vacant land over there, is there?
Well, just
Parking
some
lots available, like Horton Street, Forest Street.
Forest Street that,
Yeah,
And-
Building 1 has recently gotten a permit from the zoning board to become a mini storage facility. I happen to know that because my
because
partner at
that's right off
Casey
of
got
the,
that
Is there any,
permit.
is there any other land back in there? Any other
that
space?
property
back
is
in there?
huge. Even
Uh,
where Sensata is.
I don't know. I mean, why don't you take a look at the former TI site to see if there's any vacant land back there that might be usable and
It's off of,
available.
it's off of Pleasant Street, 123.
Pleasant
Texas.
Street?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
on 123.
So it's along Pleasant Street and.
It's huge.
you
It goes
can
on forever.
Look at Haggerty Highway and Texans Way and some other names like that. If you
Sensata's
go in
This
Perry-
land, like you
if you go
wouldn't
in
believe
Perry
down there.
Avenue, if you go in Perry Avenue past the Stop and Shop, it's all back in there.
And how far would you say it is from the current?
Well, I think it'd be
Please.
close enough.
It's
to-
it's closer, it's
No, it's
closer
a little
than
more
some of
than
these
half a
other
mile.
places we looked at.
Maybe a mile.
Right.
The TI complex.
So
is
it's like a
definitely
central location, it's off of 123, so they can get out anywhere in this.
But we certainly have challenges.
Sure.
It's
I
one
know it's
thing
back in
to
their build, too.
figure out what we need, but it's another thing to figure out where to put it, right?
Right.
Question. When you guys, excuse me, when you did the scale, and we talked about 100,000 square foot building, were you thinking all on one floor at that point, or what was your rationale? Like, could we say, well, we only need a 50,000 square foot building, but we just 2 floors instead?
Well, yeah, the size of the footprint is significant here because of the equipment bay, right? But
Exactly.
What portion of that 100,000 is on the main level?
So what portion did you use in comparison for those sites?
Just kind of holistically, just showing, you know, not want to say worst case scenario, but just kind of showing from a visual standpoint for everyone here, just to say, you know, this is where we're, you know, there's the aprons, there's the impound lot, all within that area. So you're just kind of taking that chunk of land anyways for right around the building. Didn't include any of the parking, doesn't include anything else. So it's just, again, just trying to visually just show real quick how it could not work.
We haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
Where that 100,000 comes from is basically, we've done a lot of these. The apparatus bay is 60,000 on its own.
Easily.
Okay.
What
So
you
that-
put in the support spaces in
Right.
and around
And
that,
then
and the aprons.
You've got support spaces, you've got firematics. We know kind of what has to happen in
Okay.
a space, but we haven't got that far.
And so right now, to answer the question before, current fire headquarters at 100 Union Street to Stop and Shop, I just picked that because it's near there.
Yeah, it's right
Is
there.
1.1 miles.
Okay.
I mean, we certainly have to look at everything, and because we can't propose to the community spending tens of millions of dollars without being absolutely sure that we've done everything we can. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, on the building size, would you say that the 100,000 is the optimal size, and that if you needed to, you could compress it and go up, as you indicated?
It absolutely will.
So the
It will
100,000
get
is the
smaller.
preferred?
But what Eric was trying to explain is, it's a good gauge at this point.
Right.
To say 100,000, because we still need to consider things like the emergency generator, the transformer, dumpsters, recycling bins. Those things take up area and they knock that building footprint, so to speak, is we're just using it as a general term. It's not the hard structure of the building, the bricks and mortars, but it's that close proximity to the building for security, for operations, in and out proper proximity before we start getting into some of the outlier, and the term outlier is not the best term to use for it, but the parking, for the, you know, for the department, the staff parking, both departments, and then public parking.
So that sounds like that is the optimal. And with so many variables compounding the choice, I would think that it would be nice to settle on, well, this is our preferred footprint.
Absolutely.
And because you change things, there's no end to
Yeah.
Some of the
choices.
footprint's driven by.
The footprint will, the footprint will also depend on the site. I mean, if we got a very steep site, we're going to want to do that footprint differently than if we have a large flat site. And that footprint will change if we're in a neighborhood, because we're going to want to think about which side of that building we put up against the residences adjacent, and where we want to put the apparatus bay in regards to residences. So that'll all depend, and then it'll start gelling once we start narrowing in on a site and figuring out what do we have to do to make a building work on that site.
Terry, do you have a question?
I have a question. Regarding the remote stations, and you had said depending on where they centralize the site, they may make changes in some of the remote stations, what the coverage is. Did you look at the longevity of each building? Because some of those stations are falling apart.
we
Twin
fully
Village,
understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think Sean and the team has done a full dive into like we
Yeah.
did with the headquarters, because that was kind of outside, but fully aware that, the majority of the buildings are stretching their useful life. What I meant with that statement is that may just be a simple adjustment in manpower. That's part of the response time study, is looking at, if we shift too far over this way, how can, with what your building assets and your building locations, be made to creatively adjust to counter that shift in the location of the building. So all aspects are being explored. They are being, creatively looked at as to how can we get there. We just, with kind of the duration that's been taking to get our consultant and the chief to connect and get through his process, he's got a very lengthy process. We'll have a book probably about that thick from him. Every single room will be completely laid out, right down to where the receptacles, the recycling receptacle is going to sit for the chief's office. He's a very meticulous individual, but that process does take a little bit of time. We'll get that information and come back, but we didn't want to keep kicking the can down the road, so to speak, with you folks.
No, I think this was very valuable for us to hear this, to understand what you've done and where you're going. And I think the geographical challenge is something that we're going to have to work on, and we're going to have to seek guidance from people with a higher pay grade than us, since we're volunteers and don't get paid at all.
All right, higher pay grade than me.
And maybe even than Jeremy. So, any other questions?
Just one comment, because you had mentioned security and what should be said in public and what shouldn't be said in public previously. As we head into the consideration of taking properties, that's a very sensitive subject.
We would have to go into executive session
Yes,
to discuss
just
that.
so everybody knows.
Yeah, because you may not realize, but this is televised live to tens of people in Attleboro. And then they watch it on YouTube later because they just can't get enough of it. And then they put it on Channel 9 or Channel 98, repeated for months. So your words
And then
will
I
be
bump into them at
forever.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Excuse me?
And then I bump into them at Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll have to say hi
Which
to the
one?
chiefs if they're watching this tomorrow.
Yeah, so we are probably, the most popular board on television in Attleboro. Well, maybe not.
Well, the only board,
I think we're the only board, so.
yeah,
Well, the municipal council's on.
Well, they don't
well, they're not a
count.
board, so,
Yeah.
and they get paid.
We're hoping for syndication.
Yeah. So, anything else that you need to present to us tonight?
No, a
Unless you
schedule.
wanna talk
Yeah, it's
about
kind of a
schedule.
brief schedule, so, you know where we are. Obviously the big hurdle right now is
Yeah.
to narrow down some sites that will work. We're gonna work with, there you go. We need to go work through the rest of the program, which we've been discussing. From that, we'll start working on some footprints and, square footages and find those efficiencies. So that kind of brings us into early next year, and then, start working through some schematic
Yeah,
designs.
I mean, I
and
know
some-
our contract has some timeframes, but given the political realities here, I'm not sure whether we're gonna meet those timeframes, and we understand that it may not be your fault if we as a community need to revisit some sites and make some political decisions, so, keep on. We wanna keep on the schedule if we can, but we understand that, right now, no matter what you did for designing a building, we really have no place to put it.
Correct. So, we're tiptoeing around that until we kind of hone in on, the program, the site and everything like that. So, we'll get to the level we can without, spending too much time in the wrong direction until we, get to a more
Okay.
consolidated.
But I think this
area.
process is useful too, in that when we go to present this, especially for a debt exclusion, folks are gonna say, well, did you think about this place? Did you think about that one? Did you think about that? So I think the final report, as you guys have done this before, we have to say not only why a particular site works, but why other sites didn't work. So I thought this was useful. Thank you for that.
All right, then, Anything else, or are we ready? Well, our next meeting is January 4th. You guys won't be there, and that will be at City Hall?
I think so. I have to work with Concom and see how long I think our agenda is going to be, but if we can wrap it up
If
by
we have a
6:30.
relatively short night, then we'll be at City Hall. If for some reason we're going to have a longer night, stay tuned.
Yeah, we typically finish before we started tonight.
But obviously, this is an extremely important thing for our community and a big part of our mandate, so therefore, a motion to adjourn at 7:42 is in order.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.